Welcome back to another edition of the Edge podcast. Publisher Brenden Slaughter here for BeaversEdge.com, joined by Beavers Edge writer and KGO radio host T.J. Mathewson and Beavers Edge writer Ryan Harlan. We're coming to you guys a midweek following Oregon State's double overtime win over Colorado State at Reser Stadium. The Beavers will be traveling back on the road, their first road game since September, and just the second one of the year, as they will face the Nevada Wolfpack down in Reno this weekend. Got a whole lot to get into on the podcast, but good to see you guys once again. Let's go ahead and just start with you, Tej. How was that post-game show Friday or Saturday night? Imagine it went much later than you originally thought it would. Kind of like how Ryan and I were like, we thought we'd be out of here by about now as we're just getting started on our writing. And Ryan and I can confidently say, TJ, we closed out the press box.
No pre-writes.
First time this season.
Double overtime.
First time this season, Ryan and I were the only people left except for the cleaning crew. So we're like, okay, time to go, time to go. But how was that? Oh, man.
Well, the double overtime, first of all, allowed me to go get dinner before I got back here, which is great. I was really worried everywhere was gonna close because nothing's open late here, and I'd be, I'd have to eat peanut butter and jelly for dinner, which isn't the worst thing in the world, but I'd prefer something hot. I will say it was one of the more underratedly entertaining post game shows I have had in my 4 years here.
Yeah.
We had one dude call in the middle. I think he's in his 70s. Sounded coherent, first time talking. Somehow managed to get wasted by the time he called back at the end of the show.
That's hilarious.
We were thinking, I'm like, well, that kind of sounds like how this game was. It was composed in the middle, and then all of a sudden it went off the rails at the end, and the Beavers still managed to come out with a victory. But not a lot of overarching concern, because I think one of the main conclusions that people are coming to, and I sort of came around on this too, is that with a first year head coach, there are going to be some blips, especially coming off a bye. This is the first time Trent Bray's playing off a bye in season. How's the energy of his team? How buttoned up are they? All the stuff like this, and as we saw, it wasn't perfect. They didn't cover. I think people thought it was going to be a little more lopsided. I think all three of us thought it was going to be a little more lopsided. It was not. I think it is mostly due to the Beavers just not playing up to par. There are some real concerns we continue to see with this roster in a number of areas that I'm sure we'll touch on. But win's a win, right?
Yeah.
4-1, 2 wins till bowl eligibility. Favored again on the road this week. You'll probably be favored, I'm guessing, slightly at home 2 weeks from now for homecoming. So it looks up in that retrospect, but it's not all sunshine.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I mean, I think we'll get into it. I think this has all the makings of a trap game this weekend, guys. I mean, you talk about Oregon State, an emotional win coming off, regardless of how that result was, but just an emotional win. And this Nevada team has been far more competent than I would have expected them to be in the first year of kind of what I thought was a rebuild, but we'll get into that shortly. Ryan, you were obviously right there, right beside me, through and through to the nitty gritty of the end of that game. And I remember you and I sitting up there and we're looking, for those who don't know, usually the reporters up in the press box take off with about 3 to 4 minutes on the game clock and make their way down to the press conference room to get ready for the press conference, because in 90% of college football games with about 3 minutes left, you kind of know what the result's going to be. Now, I'll say this. There's been only a few times at Reser Stadium that I can recall as a member of the media where I've been like, it's going to be tough to get down there. And we're sitting there and we're watching them drive, and I looked at Ryan, I'm like, we're either going to have to run to the press conference or Everett's going to have to make this kick. And we're going to have to go to overtime, because if not, we're going to have to scoot down these stairs. And, nevertheless, I'll say this, Ryan, there were probably 70% of the people that cover Oregon State football were not in the press box to watch that ending. So I'm glad you and I stayed through to the bitter end, man, because it was fantastic to see. The emotions were up and down. I'm curious to get your overall thoughts on the game, but ultimately, you just got to be impressed with the way they found a way to dig it out on a day they did not have their best.
Oh, yeah.
Or we're healthy for that matter. Yeah.
Yeah. But a win is a win, regardless of kind of the nitty gritty when you get into it of like, you break it down and you're like, oh yeah, they weren't great on the offensive side of the ball early on, defensive side of the ball, and stopping the run as well too. But like winning a double overtime game like that kind of at least masks some of those deficiencies a little bit, and I think kind of going into it, you get a little kind of a into this week, you get a little bit of a reprieve for that. But there's some legitimate concerns I still have about this team, particularly offense and defense. And yeah, I'm kind of glad too that we were able to see the entirety of that because usually that's my kind of rule of thumb a little bit too of having done this now for a while and and like even in close games like that, I try to stay to the very end as much
Yeah.
as I can to at least get the final detail in there before I add whatever I need to from the press conference into my story. But yeah, I was like, I couldn't imagine what it would be like to be in the media room of the Valley Football Center watching that game.
And just hearing
Yeah.
the crowd react before the TVs can,
Oh yeah.
Could you guys not just stand on the concourse, watch the kick go through, and then walk the 50 feet from outside the gates to the Valley Football Center?
Well, actually, because you can't. I mean, you'd have to go out and then around. But at that point, yeah, we could have. But like it's tough when you're still doing updates and tweeting, right? So
That's fair. Yeah.
yeah. It's been one of those things that there isn't a really easy way to do it. It's nice when you're like, hey, 6 minutes on the game clock. This one is wrapped up and head on down. But nevertheless, it was a big time win for Oregon State, and I think for that, and I understand that. Some could look at it and say, hey, it's not a big win. Colorado State was not a good team. But when you consider they didn't have Jaden Robinson, they didn't have Kobe Singleton, they're two starting corners. They throw in, Andre Jordan, Mason White, Trice Ivy, a complement of guys. And then to go up against, I would be willing to bet that Torrey Horton is one of the best receivers they will face all year individually. I mean, just knowing that, Washington State's probably got a couple dudes and, so on and so forth, maybe Cal too. But you're talking about a guy who there were draft scouts at Reser Stadium to see. It was, Horton, and he made life difficult, getting, some big time plays. I think back to that 2-point conversion, Ryan, where he just looked like a man amongst boys running past. His speed is next level, right? And you're like, ooh, okay. And then, credit to Andre Jordan, who we caught up with today. He made that great play on 4th and goal. And Ryan, how many times in that game had Colorado State gotten bailed out on the 4th and to go with penalties, automatic first downs that basically kept that game going. And then, I don't mind a game, being called to an extent as long as it's, within reason. And I really appreciated at the very end of that game, Ryan, because you look back on that play, they could have maybe thrown a flag on Andre Jordan on that last play. They could have. Now, I appreciate letting guys play, and if it's close, 4th and goal in a double overtime game, I just think there were too many flags, and I think there were way too many flags.
Oh yeah, and really too, I think it's just like I said post game, it's just a lack of consistency and the way that they were calling some of those calls there, where it kind of looked a little one sided. But then again, good teams overcome bad officiating, so there is that too. But yeah, that celebration though, I'm sure probably Andre Jordan probably was talked to about that in film session for probably if I had to guess, just
Yeah.
because be like, hey, you weren't flagged for it this time, but
It was a big
in another game.
I mean, he's pulling like out, like he's like, "Where's the flat?" Like
yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
You watch the replay, it's like if that ref had turned around. I mean, it's hard to say, But I'm
Yeah.
curious for your guys. Ultimately, the biggest loss in this game is Jam Griffin, right? I mean, we've managed to go this much into the podcast without mentioning it, and I'm just curious what your guys' take is on this. Obviously, I was asked about it again today. The only thing I can say for certainty based on, Bray and their lack of transparency with injuries, he's going to be on the shelf for a minute. We don't know how long that's going to be, but he's going to be on the shelf for a minute. He's not going to play this weekend. He's not going to play next weekend. That I can almost pretty much guarantee, if not longer. So that being said, Ryan, you were in the press conference with me. You guys were, and TJ, you as well. were also up there when we saw Jam have the injury. Josh Gray came over to him. Had multiple teammates go over to him after he came out of the medical tent. Then you talk about that heartfelt speech that Anthony Hankerson gave Ryan. Again, I'm not declaring anything. I'm just saying from reading the tea leaves, it looks to me like they're going to be without him for an extended period of time.
Yeah, the way that Hank was talking about him post game, that was kind of my indication of
Yeah.
he's going to miss some time, regardless of what extent that is currently right now, because we just don't have the details at the moment to definitively say how long he's going to miss. But I think that was probably the best indication of everything. And I know some fans were probably holding out a little bit of hope that Jam came out post game, signed some autographs for some
It's
fans
true.
without crutches, but I was like, hope is kind of a dangerous thing, and even then, I'm like,
Yeah.
I think it's just like, yeah, like you said, you just pencil in him not being available for this weekend and then next weekend, and then you just kind of go from there. But in his absence, I think that whole room is going to step up, and we're going to see a lot of Saladin Allah and also Cornell Hatcher and Jake Reichel in there too, depending on however they split carries to supplement the loss of production that Jam Griffin brings in the running game. But I know, speaking of Hatcher, that Coach Ford is really high on him. And funny enough, that week when we talked to him, he said, "Yeah, I feel comfortable in bringing Hatcher up in case of injuries if they happen to the room, and they've happened." So
Right.
now it's time to see what they can do going forward.
And I think
TJ,
there is going to be some drop off here because we
there
could
will
think
be.
of just the rushing production first, which as talented as Saladin is, he's not Jam Griffin. So
Right.
that's a start. Hankerson is going to still tote the rock primarily, but I mean they've noted they don't want to overuse them. They said this is about his maximum rushage per game. And if the Beavers are going to run it like 45, 50 times a game, Hank's still only carrying it 25 times. They're
Well,
not going to run him. They're
yeah.
not going to run him into the ground. So that's going to leave carries for other guys. But also means other guys like Saladin and Hatcher and Reichel are going to have to be on the field in pass protection. Now, Coach Ford has said how much he trusts Jam and Hank in pass protection. Says literally doesn't matter what they're calling. I trust what's going to happen. Reichel, I believe, is good in pass protection too. I think they're completely fine with him, but not as much as a rusher because he's more of a big-bodied rusher. He's going to a yard in a cloud of dust. That's it. That's the kind of runner he is. He's not going to break one off in space. So that takes away that element when he's in the game. Saladin and Hatcher aren't all the way up when it comes to pass protection. That's the reason they're not playing. That's literally it. They've said it. So there's going to be a drop off in that too. And for the limited pass reps that this offense goes through on a daily basis, you can't afford, those 5 play action pass reps where the running back is trying to block a linebacker on a blitz, get blown up. And that ruins those explosive play opportunities for a Beaver offense that's not explosive to begin with, really.
Right. I'm curious, great points, TJ. And I think, everything you said, plus the fact that Jam, he was averaging over 6 yards a carry. Right. I think Hank is not too far behind, like 4 something. Maybe it was closer to 5 after the game. But, a part of me, fellas, looks at this and goes, whatever happened to the glory days when a running back would get like 35, 40 carries in a game? Like, take me back to. Sorry.
I was going to say, I think about that too. And I would love to see the number breakdown. You could do it the NFL or you could do college, right? Whichever workhorse is able to get through those 35 to 40 carries without a drop off.
I think back to, just the Beaver teams that I grew up rooting for. And, Mike Parker and I have talked about it a handful of times. The days when Evanson Bernard would get 35, 40 carries a game. And you're like, he never came out. He never came out. And you're like, it's not like he ever got seriously hurt. And I just wonder if over the years, maybe guys are a little less built that way. It's kind of hard to say, but maybe you're not doing, maybe that's like a high school thing and a youth thing where it was a lot of carries at a young age, so they were used to it, and
Yeah.
maybe now it's more spread out. But I found that
Well, I
very
think guys are
fascinating.
also looking forward into the future too and trying to avoid the wear and tear for the next level where they're actually making serious money. Which
But now
again,
they can't make serious money in college.
I can't, but like Evanson Bernard wasn't.
For sure.
That
for
we
sure.
know, of course, not above board.
Right.
So,
No, of course.
like there's that, like there is always the unicorn of Evanson Bernard, or I think the best example is Derrick Henry, who's ran the ball 400 times a year in high school, ran it 400 times a year in college, and continues to run it 400 times a year in the NFL into age 30. Like those guys are unique. They're unicorns. Not everyone is built like that. So for a Jam and Hank, they feel like it's I would say they probably have this vision themselves, but the coaches also are looking out for their future as well of the running backs. And that's what they do.
Yeah.
Like it's part of college, right? Is building these guys up to have great futures.
Right.
For running backs especially, like that's what you think about when you go along. You can get one true workhorse year in college.
So do you guys think that, obviously I'm not going to say that any of these guys are on the same level of talent, but do you think there have been cases in recent years? I mean, think back to, just a couple years ago. People forget that Damian Martinez didn't seize that starting running back job till about week 5 of his freshman year. And that was after, Jam got banged up, if memory serves. And, so did
Fenwick, yeah.
Fenwick, thank you. I was like,
Fenwick and Jam, I think both had both missed at least a little bit of time, or at least there needed to be that opportunity for him to jump in.
Right, and I'm not saying that Cornell Hatcher or Saladino or Damian Martinez, but do you think there could be a moment where, hey, because we saw these guys, I'm talking to all three of us as far as like fall camp, Saladin Halal and Cornell Hatcher were two of your guys' most written about names this year in camp, as far as just guys who impressed you. I mean, I feel like it was every other day those guys were ripping off runs, especially with Salahadin. I think he ended up being kind of the better of the two immediately, and that's why ultimately when the first depth chart came out, he was third. We saw him make some plays, and like TJ said, if he could just pick up pass protection, do you think one of those guys could pop and just, I'm not saying be Jam, but be good enough to where you're like, okay, this could work?
Not to start, but play more, sure. I don't think anyone's passing Hank.
No. I just mean as far as like being able to step in and competently be that 1A, 1B kind of a thing.
Sure.
Like
it is very different, I think, from the 2022 season with Damian Martinez.
Sure. Right?
Yeah, and I really do think that like you just need to see more, I think, kind of out of Allah, and then now Hatcher, and then Reichel, in order to kind of figure out who's going to be that guy that steps up. And I think it's a little different scenario, a little bit, just because the amount of drop off that you had between Jam and Hank was very minimal.
Mm-hmm.
But like looking back to that season, it was kind of like Dame did stuff differently from Fenwick. Fenwick did stuff differently from him, and also too with both of them differently from Griffin. So you had kind of a different skill set with each three of those backs that year, but you kind of have a similar skill set with the two, in Griffin and Hankerson. So I just don't know who's going to be quite the exact fill in to be that 1B option behind him. But if I had to put money on it, I probably would say it's Saladin. Just similarly, kind of similar skill set a little bit to Griffin, but I think I need to see more kind of him repping out there than anything else to be confidently saying that for the rest of the season.
Could we, is there a chance we see just massive like walk-on energy from Jake Reichel, and just see like the Jake Reichel just come out of nowhere and just kind of be that alternative style running back to Hankerson? I mean, I know it's a stretch, but again, when you think about it, Oregon State is starting two former walk-ons at wide receiver. They're not walk-ons anymore, but I'm just saying talent is talent sometimes, and what you do with your opportunity, you do with your opportunity. And to Ryan's point, I think all three of those guys will be given an opportunity. And whether or not, and I really do think it's going to be like ride the hot hand, and it's like, here's Hank getting his carries, and then here's 3 carries for Saladin, here's 3 carries for Cornell, here's a couple carries for Jake, and who was the most productive out of that? Okay, well, we'll maybe go with him next. You know what I mean? I that's kind of what I see there. But to your guys' point, it's gonna fall off, it's gonna hurt, and I think that's going to put some more onus on the passing game to kind of get kicked into gear. And you talk about a passing game that just really it's done enough. But would I be hot takey, guys, to say the passing game looked the best it did on Saturday when they were just dinking and dunking down the field to Trent Walker to set up that field goal? I mean, again, I still feel like, Darius Clemens is not quite found his rhythm the way we thought. Nice to see Jermaine Terry have a pulse. As far as like, I think that was his first catch this last week. So that's nice to see because Jermaine's a big target, fast. But just overall, like, what are your guys' thoughts on how they can get that passing game or try to get it kicked into gear ahead of Nevada? Because there were still some issues against Colorado State, I think.
Could try some more tempo.
I like that.
Yeah.
Switch up the tempo of the passing game. I still just think if the personnel is going to always limit what this passing game can do. Like Terry gets his first catch, but we know if this was a good receiving tight end room, they would have utilized that already. I feel like personally in a game plan, you would want to utilize your best players in the best opportunities, and they haven't really done that with the tight ends. The Clemens thing I thought was very very interesting of
Like,
not
I
not
go with
using
that.
it. And
Yeah, like
not
you
even
just said.
he wasn't even getting targeted,
I know.
which could be on the quarterback, a combination of quarterback and play call. So we'll say 50% blame on the game plan, and then 50% Giovanni perhaps just didn't like the matchup and wasn't open. That could be it. They are going to have to win some of these road games, which they're again finally going out on the road again here this week after being at home for essentially the entire first part of the season,
just
first month and a half.
Forever.
Passing on the running game on the road is a little bit easier to manage, but bringing your passing game on the road is a bigger challenge that I think the better passing teams do. So, and I would like to see that, but we'd also just like to see them pass the ball a little bit more at home and look a little bit more efficient doing that.
Right.
I'd say my gripes with this offense,
go ahead,
in more of a general sense, is I think we saw some of the flaws of the style that they play in this game on Saturday. When you hold the ball for so long and you minimize the possessions, first of all, there's only so many points you could score if you're holding the ball that long. And then on top of that, if you're shortening possessions, that means the margins are going to be smaller with the other team if they're able to keep up with you. And that's what we saw. Like, it took one missed drive for Oregon State, for Colorado State to essentially grab the game out of their hands late in the fourth quarter.
Right.
Now they've managed to put together a nice drive and win in overtime. But, that's a team that was a 12-point underdog to you that was playing less than a touchdown down in the fourth quarter because they scored a touchdown, gave you the ball back, and you went 3 and out. And it was like, uh-oh. Can't do that. And that was sort of something I took away from this game, that holding the ball that long can be to a detriment as well.
It's a good point.
It makes you be more perfect.
Yeah, I didn't think about that way, TJ, but that's a good point. It really is. And Brian, I'm curious your thoughts too, ultimately, just offensively. Like, they scored 39 points. And again, that's still something to, not scoff at, but you need double overtime to do it. So, like, do you kind of agree with what TJ's getting at? Like, that's an interesting take.
Yeah, no, I do agree with that. And I understand what this team wants to do, and that's run the ball, right? But there were a few points in that game, and I even told you, Brendan, that, like, if I'm CSU's defensive coordinator, I would just stack the box and and ask, Giovanni to beat me with my arm.
Ryan might have been going down to the Nevada booth being like, or excuse me, to the Colorado State booth being like, hey guys, like, I know.
Yeah. but yeah, like that's the thing. And really, like, I just want to see, you have those weapons for a reason. You have a Trent Walker, you have a Jeremiah Noga, you have a Taz Reddix, you have a Jermaine Terry. Utilize them more often and at least keep the defense honest, because really, in reality, like a team could hypothetically do that, like a Washington State or a Boise State, and see
Hmm.
some pretty decent success against the way that this offense has been looking with the lack of explosive plays. And really, I'm not expecting like Giovanni to be otherworldly and win. You know what I mean? Win a
Hmm.
game with his arm entirely on himself. Like he's shown more than enough that he can, keep the ball as a game manager and keep it out of harm's way, and that's what you want. But like
And he can
just
run. And he can
yeah, he can
run.
run.
He
But
can
like
run.
just being able to get him into a rhythm early and getting some of those completions that are just easy completions to get him in that rhythm early and just at
Yeah,
least establish some sort of a passing identity. That's something that I kind of want to see going forward. And that's really the biggest criticism I have of the offense itself, is just because like we haven't seen a lot of it. And sure, some of that's game dictated with the
sure.
flow and how things go. But like I just don't think it's very unsustainable, I think, going forward, if you're just gonna dominate time of possession and run the ball a whole lot. I think it's an unsustainable thing. And TJ brought up a very good point. And that's something where I just think they need to at least get that into gear. Whatever that might be, I don't know, but
Yeah.
it's just something where it's like, I don't want to have to be sitting there next home game or even this weekend being like, all right, this defense can just stack the box and just see if Giovanni can beat him over the top.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely some good points, and you lead into Nevada, and there's so many interesting things about Nevada, and we got just a couple minutes before we wrap up the podcast. But again, Nevada's pretty solid against the run. Only allow 135 a game. That's fourth best in the Mountain West. And then offensively, they run the ball really well. They average almost 200 yards on the ground. That's been a weak spot for Oregon State, so that is a matchup to watch for sure. But interesting thing here, fellas, before we get into just a couple questions with Nevada, because I think it's definitely interesting. So they've only played four times all time, which I think is fascinating considering how close proximity they are. Fellas, they first played in 1903. How do you think Corvallis was in 1903? Like, I can't even picture that in my head. 1903 Corvallis.
Probably a lot of farmland, a
Yeah,
lot
like
of
you know what I mean? Like
cows. Yeah,
just
yeah.
crazy. Over 100 years ago, and they've only played three times since. Obviously, the last time coming down in 2018 when they lost on Jordan Schuker's missed field goal and Jonathan Smith's first season as coach. But the real question I want to know with this, guys, is how did Nevada hire Jeff Choate? Because I guarantee you, this dude took a pay cut coming from Texas defensive coordinator to Nevada head coach. And it's just not something you see in college football. We just saw Chip Kelly leave a sitting head coaching job to go be a coordinator because he probably made close to what he was going to make. I found it just fascinating, and that's why I look at it and I go, shoot, dude, Nevada got themselves a savvy hire. They've been competitive in every game this year. They nearly beat SMU in week 0. And if Oregon State's not prepared for this game, fellas, they could win. Like Jeff Choate brought in some dudes. They have some transfers. Former Colorado quarterback Brendan Lewis is one of the more efficient guys in the Mountain West. This is a game that screams kind of trap to me. I think Oregon State can win. So does Vegas, as they're a 3-point favorite. But if they don't show up on the road, this game screams trap to me. Just quickly, I'm curious both your guys' kind of thoughts on the Wolfpack. We'll start with you, Ryan.
I mean, remember what Brendan Lewis did against Oregon State at his time at Colorado?
True.
That's where I'm a little worried going into this weekend, just because I remember that, but also that happened to be the game where that in the final nail of the coffin for Tim Tepesar,
Yep,
and Trent
he was
Bray
showing
took
the pink
over,
slip.
and the rest is history. But yeah, I think that's really what my biggest thing is. I think it's just containing Lewis, being able to attack that Nevada defense and be efficient and be smart with the ball. Because if you have a similar game like you did against CSU, I really don't think you win this game, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean it just depends, right? I mean, again,
Yeah, of
Nevada, the
course.
fact that Nevada went toe to toe with San Jose State last week, and San Jose State nearly beat Washington State, tells me how good this Nevada team is. And I didn't have it. I mean, they were so bad the last 2 years under Ken Wilson. Like I said, Choates had them, competent. And heading into the year, this was a game that I kind of circled and was like, yeah, that's a rebuilding Nevada team. That's not going to be, all that massive of a challenge. And I credit, maybe it's the fact that he was head coach at Montana State and had a desire to kind of come back out west. I mean, that would be one of those questions if I ever was communicating with him. I'd be curious to know, because it seems like if he has any minuscule success here, guys, he'll be flying the coop, because, he's got big time credentials. I mean, to walk away from Steve Sarkisian's staff at Texas when you are a national championship contender this year, for what I imagine, again, maybe I'm wrong. I don't want to criticize the great state of Nevada's finances, but what was comparable or maybe a pay cut is fascinating, and I kind of love the story. Same with UNLV and what they've done with Odom too. I mean, it's kind of some cool stories out of Nevada. But TJ, what are your thoughts on this game? You obviously mentioned earlier in the podcast that they're favorited on the road, and they will be, but a 3-point favorite now, come down from 4. Does that mean a whole lot to you going into this game?
I think if they say toss up is what I think Vegas is. I think that's what Vegas looks at this as, a one-score game. I think Vegas looks at this as comparable to some of Nevada's games where they've had an opportunity to, all these games they've lost by a score this season on the road, not on the road, but just in general.
SMU too, yeah. They should have beat SMU. Should have beat them.
They had the ball back with a chance to win the game in the fourth quarter and didn't in any of those 3 games. Like, think of what happens if they converted 2 of those fourth quarter drives at all.
Right.
They look a whole lot different, and perhaps the spread is different in this game as well. I think it all comes down to Beavers being able to stop the run. I can't tell you what's wrong with this defense. They're throwing a lot of coach speak at us when we're asking what's wrong with the run defense. So I hope that means it's getting fixed instead of maybe we don't have the personnel to stop the run, which I feel like they should, especially against the Mountain West schedule, sans Ashton Genty. But it's all going to start this week. They got quite a challenge there in Reno, running the football. And I'll say, for Choate's sake, maybe he took a pay cut, but he also did get a resume bump. Head coach also looks pretty good on a resume. Brendan, FBS head coach is better than FCS head coach. It's better than FBS defensive coordinator.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. And it's just it's the whole it's the whole like just narrative now that I think it's like, it reminds me like how Clemson was able to keep Brent Venables forever because they made him the highest paid DC.
Right.
It's interesting, right? And I think different guys are motivated by different things, and some guys want to be a head coach, some guys are like, nah, I'm gonna be a coordinator. So that's fascinating. But nevertheless, like the guys said, big challenge for Oregon State in Reno this weekend, 4:30 p.m. CBS Sports Network. The Beavers on the road again. Last time they were on the road, they had a shutout of a Mountain West team, knocked off San Diego State 21-0. Will they find that same success? We shall see. So make sure to stay locked into myself, Ryan Harlan, T.J. Mathewson, all on the damn board for all of our road coverage leading up to the game. And make sure to stay locked into BeaversEdge.com, as we're going to have our injury report, predictions, and everything else leading up to the game. But again, a big shout out to the fellas. Appreciate you guys joining me on this edition of the Edge podcast. We'll check in next week and see how Oregon State fared against Nevada, and look ahead to the other team from the state of Nevada. They'll be coming into Reser Stadium, UNLV. Thanks for watching this edition of the Edge podcast.